The Trepingus County High Sheriff was a whiskey-nosed old boy with a gut like a washtub and a head of white hair so fine it looked like pipe cleaner fuzz. I knew him well. He'd been up to Cold Mountain plenty of times to see what he called his boys off into the great beyond. Execution witnesses sat in the same folding chairs you've probably sat in yourself a time or two, at funerals or church suppers or Grange bingo. In fact, we borrowed ours from the Mystic Tie number 44 Grange back in those days, and every time Sheriff Homer Cribbus sat down in one, I waited for the dry crack that would signal collapse. I dreaded that day and hoped for it, both at the same time, but it was a day that never came. Not long after, couldn't have been more than one summer after the Dederick girls were abducted, he had a heart attack in his office, apparently while screwing a 17-year-old black girl named Daphne Shirtliff. There was a lot of talk about that, with him always sporting his wife and 6 boys around so prominent come election time. Those were the days when, if you wanted to run for something, the saying used to be Baptist or be gone. But people love a hypocrite, you know, they recognize one of their own, and it always feels so good when someone gets caught with his pants down and his dick up and it isn't you. Besides being a hypocrite, he was incompetent, the kind of fellow who'd get himself photographed petting some lady's cat when it was someone else, Deputy Rob McGee, for instance, who'd actually risked a broken collarbone by going up the tree where Mistress Pussycat was and bringing her down. McGee listened to Marjorie Dederick babble for maybe 2 minutes, then cut her off with 4 or 5 questions, quick and curt, like a trained fighter's flicking little jabs to the face, the kind of punches that are so small and so hard that the blood comes before the sting. When he had answers to these, he said, "I'll call Bobo Marchant. He's got dogs. You stay put, Ms. Dederick. If your man and your boy come back, make them stay put, too. Try, anyway." Her man and her boy had, meanwhile, followed the track of the abductor 3 miles to the northwest, but when his trail ran out of open fields and into piney woods, they lost it. They were farmers, not hunters, as I have said, and by then they knew it was an animal they were after. Along the way they had found the yellow top that matched Kathy's shorts, and another piece of Cora's nightie. Both items were drenched with blood, and neither Klaus nor Howie was in as much of a hurry as they had been at the start. A certain cold certainty must have been filtering into their hot hopes by then, working its way downward the way cold water does, sinking because it is heavier. They cast into the woods, looking for signs, found none, cast in a second place with similar lack of result, then in a third. This time they found a fantail of blood splashed across the needles of a loblolly pine. They went in the direction it seemed to point for a little way, then began the casting about process again. It was by then 9 o'clock in the morning, and from behind them they began to hear shouting men and baying dogs. Rob McGee had put together a jackleg posse in the time it would have taken Sheriff Cribbis to finish his first brandy-sweetened cup of coffee, and by 1/4 the hour they reached Klaus and Howie Dederick, the two of them stumbling desperately around on the edge of the woods. Soon the men were moving again, with Bobo's dogs leading the way. McGee let Klaus and Howie go on with them. They wouldn't have gone back if he'd ordered them, no matter how much they dreaded the outcome, and McGee must have seen that, but he made them unload their weapons. The others had done the same, McGee said. It was safer. What he didn't tell them, nor did anyone else, was that the Dedericks were the only ones who had been asked to turn their loads over to the deputy. Half distracted and wanting only to go through to the end of the nightmare and be done with it, they did as he asked. When Rob McGee got the Dedericks to unload their guns and give him their loads, he probably saved John Coffey's miserable excuse for a life. The baying, yawping dogs pulled them through 2 miles of scrub pine, always on that same rough northwest heading. Then they came out on the edge of the Trepingus River, which is wide and slow at that point, running southeast through low, wooded hills where families named Cray and Robinette and Duplessis still made their own mandolins and often spat out their own rotted teeth as they plowed. Deep countryside where men were apt to handle snakes on Sunday morning and lie down in carnal embrace with their daughters on Sunday night. I knew their families, most of them had sent Sparky a meal from time to time. On the far side of the river, The members of the posse could see the June sun glinting off the steel rails of a great southern branch line. About a mile downstream to their right, a trestle crossed toward the coalfields of West Green. Here they found a wide trampled patch in the grass and low bushes, a patch so bloody that many of the men had to sprint back into the woods and relieve themselves of their breakfasts. They also found the rest of Cora's nightgown lying in this bloody patch, and Howie, who had held up admirably until then, reeled back against his father and nearly fainted. And it was here that Bobo Marchant's dogs had their first and only disagreement of the day. There were 6 in all, 2 bloodhounds, 2 blue tick hounds, and a couple of those terrier-like mongrels border Southerners call coon hounds. The coonies wanted to go northwest, upstream along the Trapingus, the rest wanted to go in the other direction, southeast. They got all tangled in their leads, and although the papers said nothing about this part, I could imagine the horrible curses Bobo must have rained down on them as he used his hands, surely the most educated part of him, to get them straightened around again. I have known a few hound dog men in my time, and it's been my experience that, as a class, they run remarkably true to type. Bobo short-leashed them into a pack, then ran Cora Dederick's torn nightgown under their noses, to kind of remind them what they were doing out on a day when the temperature would be in the mid-90s by noon and the no-zeums were already circling the heads of the Pizeminin clouds. The coonies took another sniff, decided to vote the straight ticket, and off they all went downstream, in full cry. It wasn't but 10 minutes later when the men stopped, realizing they could hear more than just the dogs. It was a howling rather than a baying, and a sound no dog had ever made, not even in its dying extremities. It was a sound none of them had ever heard anything make, but they knew right away, all of them, that it was a man. So they said, and I believed them. I think I would have recognized it, too. I have heard men scream just that way, I think, on their way to the electric chair. Not a lot. Most button themselves up and go either quiet or joking, like it was the class picnic, but a few. Usually the ones who believe in hell as a real place, and know it is waiting for them at the end of the Green Mile. Bobo shortleashed his dogs again. They were valuable, and he had no intention of losing them to the psychopath howling and gibbering just down yonder. The other men reloaded their guns and snapped them closed. That howling had chilled them all, and made the sweat under their arms and running down their backs feel like ice water. When men take a chill like that, they need a leader if they are to go on, and Deputy McGee led them. He got out in front and walked briskly. I bet he didn't feel very brisk right then, though, to a stand of alders that jutted out of the woods on the right, with the rest of them trundling along nervously about 5 paces behind. He paused just once, and that was to motion the biggest man among them, Sam Hollis, to keep near Klaus Dederich. On the other side of the alders there was more open ground stretching back to the woods on the right. On the left was the long, gentle slope of the riverbank. They all stopped where they were, thunderstruck. I think they would have given a good deal to unsee what was before them, and none of them would ever forget it. It was the sort of nightmare, bald and almost smoking in the sun, that lies beyond the drapes and furnishings of good and ordinary lives, church suppers, walks along country lanes, honest work, love kisses in bed,